Hello and welcome to the CNC Beat on Screen. Or in the room, we'll have a dense day today on the independent serving creation, a symposium organized by the CNC and the General Department of Media and Cultural Industries from the French Ministry of Culture. Before welcoming our Minister, Roselyne Bachelot, let me take a quick look at the program. A roundtable on protecting cultural assets, a presentation of the CNC Action Plan to reduce carbon in the audiovisual sector and in movie theaters, and a roundtable on European works serving the European imaginary, an exchange on the young and movie theaters and cinemas servicing audiovisual media. We'll also speak about gender equality in the audiovisual sector and cinema, and we'll talk about cinephilia with Gianluca Farinelli. At 1:30, we'll be watching three short videos selected by the Angers Cinema. And all of this will be available on cnc.fr. For those in the room, please choose the turn your mobile phones off. Let us first receive and welcome the Minister of Culture, Roselyne Bachelot. Ladies and gentlemen, dear French and European friends, I am happy to open up this day devoted to European audiovisual and cinema creation at the CNC. This is a key challenge for the future, and I would like us to make progress in this area during the French President of the European Union. This was supposed to be held in Angers, a town that I love. I'd like to welcome the Mayor, Christophe Béchoux, who has always been committed to the young and European creation through the festival known as Premier Plan. And welcome dear Claude Éric Poirot. You know how deeply attached I am to your cultural event. But with the pandemic in Europe, we had to opt for a hybrid form of this event here in Paris. I would like first to thank the CNC and Dominique Boutenat, the chairperson, and Baptiste Goudela and all the teams who organized this important event in the very complex circumstances. France, for the 13th time, is chairing the European Council. The last time was 14 years ago, and the discussions enabled significant progress in sectors in key areas such as development of legal offering and the fight against piracy. Today, once again, we are at a turning point that will impact our economic, industrial, and cultural sovereignty as a continent. Why? Because the crisis heightened past trends and fragilities. Platforms in recent months have been soaring, but no platform is European. When broadcasting is done by foreigners, how can you guarantee cultural diversity? Given this context, with the end of the pandemic, how can we promote and reinforce European creation based on talents, its imaginary, and its companies? A European creation that can travel around the world with its singularity and its originality. How can we guarantee the freedom of creation and access to works of the mind and the diversity of cultural expressions that are key principles in the European project? We have already done a lot to establish new rules for a more open and competitive economy and to maintain an industrial and cultural ambition for and through creation. Since 2018, the European Union has written an important page in the history of its audiovisual policy, and the European Directive on Serving the Audiovisual Media that was adopted 3 years ago is an unprecedented breakthrough. In its Article 13 on promoting European works, It has now been transposed in France and making the future of financing creation more secure. Thanks to the decree on serving audiovisual media on demand, dated the 22nd of June last, platforms established in another member state, but targeting France, are subject to investment obligations in European creation. These obligations amount to 20% of revenue generated in France, specifically targeted for independent cinematographic and audiovisual creation. This obligation is framed by agreement signed with the new authority in charge of regulating the sector, the ARCOM, and I'd like to welcome its chairman, who will be speaking this afternoon, Eric Olivier Mestre. This integration of platforms in a financing model set up 35 years ago is a major progress. We have found structural solutions for funding works. This will change the face of our sector and make our creation more international by giving it a global exposition. Integrating platforms in French models calls for readjusting our time frame for media if it is necessary for the new investment obligation. This is why I wanted to finalize this project rapidly after this mad decree that has been done since yesterday. We have also seen to it that television channels in other member states can also contribute to European creation in France. It is therefore the entire scope of broadcasters in France that will take part in financing European and French creation, thanks to this new regulation. Another major breakthrough, the protection of authors in the digital era through the transposition of European directives for SMA and copyright. How? The public aids of the CNC and therefore access to domestic tax credits are now subject to the inclusion in contracts signed with authors of standard clauses ensuring compliance with their moral rights and obligations. Thanks to the decree transposing the SMA directive, authors will now have their word to say in negotiating funding obligations with platforms. The transposition of the copyright initiative will enable us to start a new negotiation cycle to improve things from an economic perspective, and I hope that these negotiations will come through quickly. Lastly, we wanted to have in the Intellectual Property Code a clear duty for platforms to pass on to regulators all information on the consumption of the works in their possession. That is for the benefit of producers, collective management bodies, and authors themselves. This immense progress in regulations in Europe will considerably reinforce and structurally improve our industry at a time of economic turnarounds that are major. As I said before, it is vital for all countries in the European Union to have strong regulations so as to promote creation and the broadcasting of independent European works. The breakthroughs that will be supplemented in addition to the cultural scope by regulating all digital platforms through the regulation on digital services, DSA, and the MA on digital markets that are also being negotiated. These two texts will form an additional important step in regulating the digital sector by endowing the European Union with a new framework of responsibilities imposed upon the major online platforms. Both texts will ultimately be added to the SMA and copyright directives. Thanks to these historical regulatory evolutions, we must work harder to provide a common response to the new challenges facing the European audiovisual industry. In this respect, I'd like to point out the remarkable work carried out by the Slovenian presidency and the conclusions seeking to increase the availability and competitiveness of audiovisual and digital content from Europe. And with my counterparts, we adopted this at the Council of Ministers meeting on the 30th of November last. Let me also stress the work carried out by Thierry Breton, the Commissioner, for over a year with the Action Plan for Media and the Audiovisual, and noting culture as one of the 14 ecosystems for the Industrial Recovery Plan. This industrial vision is essential. It is a vision for the future. As I pointed out, I decided to place the priorities that are important to me when it comes to the audiovisual sector under our presidency from the standpoint of the independence and structuration of the audiovisual and cinema sector and cultural and creative industries more generally speaking. I propose that the Council must probe into the findings on European cultural and creative work that will be presented to my European counterparts at the Cultural Forum on the 14th of April next. Today, there are three issues with respect to our independence in creation: protecting strategic European cultural assets, the definition of European works, and lastly, setting up an environmentally friendly and socially responsible hub for cultural assets in Europe. Protecting strategic assets in the field of culture in Europe is the first essential challenge that we must all face to protect our cultural sovereignty. Our production companies, our theaters, our filming sector, video games fragilized by 2 years of pandemic are exposed to the risk of being bought out by players who have nothing to do with culture. For example, investment funds from third countries that are foreign to the European Union. In France, we have changed the law so that whenever a producer sells their catalog to a company that is not subject to the same laws and rules as production companies, government can require of that buyer guarantees and the continual releases to protect the work. But this is only a first step. I am deeply convinced that we, Europeans, cannot take the risk that our works and our companies that are constantly fighting for their survival should maybe bought out at low cost by extra European companies. It is also true that studios in France 2030, the investment plan announced by the President of the French Republic, enabling us to cater to the need for more and more European works throughout the Union. The problem, therefore, is European, and together we must find a solution to protect our strategic cultural assets, and I will pay great attention to your discussions today on that topic. Furthermore, I would like a study to be carried out at European level on the independence of European works. Today, you know that the definition of European works in European law does not include any criterion linked to the possession of assets and rights by European producers. A work, therefore, can be described as European, while being entirely financed and owned by extra-European companies. I wish that the study must be embarked upon, and I repeat the request made by several member states of the Commission for it to carry out work on this matter, and I have no doubt that the debate will lead to positive findings. And lastly, we can go even further so that in the future all the European audiovisual industry may be a model when it comes to social responsibility thanks to its diversity and the values of equality and liberty. For me, this means enabling everyone to have a chance to stand out and view themselves as a creator irrespective of their origin. In that respect, I commend the work carried out by the Commission with respect to gender equality in the cinema and the strategy for gender equality and the progress that is provided for in the Europe Creative 2021-2027. In France, on our side, we have made good progress with important reforms in these areas. I'm thinking of the gender equality bonus for filming crews, for the work being carried out by Palmodiai right now on the notion of gender equality with respect to works by the CNC, and also conditioning aid from the CNC to the fact of upholding labor laws and fighting against sexist and sexual violence that are extended to live performances, and the insurance clause to cover the risk of harassment while filming. So a truly responsible industry is one that seeks a sustainable future. The Paris Agreement of 2015, signed by 195 countries, will lead to a low-carbon national strategy targeting carbon neutrality by 2050. An action plan was therefore formed under the auspices of the CNT to support cinema and audiovisual in its transition for the environment. Dear friends, these are the important topics that I would like us to examine during the French presidency of the European Union. This will enable us to organize and to guarantee our cultural sovereignty in Europe. I therefore rely on the exchanges that you'll be having today, and that will nourish the discussions that I will continue to have with my European counterparts in the coming months. So I hope that your exchanges will be fruitful, and I thank you.